Every Tuesday evening, Emma would head out for her beloved book club. She'd grab her tote bag, kiss me on the cheek, and tease, "Don't wait up." It wasn't just a book club, though not to her. She called it her sanity night. But I jokingly referred to it as wine night. Emma wasn't an alcoholic or anything, but the stories she brought back about the book club's antics, they always involved a little too much Shiraz and a whole lot of laughter. I supported her wholeheartedly. At least, I thought I did. Maybe I wasn't as attentive as I could have been. Looking back, maybe I missed some obvious signs. One night, Emma came back from her club around 11, a little later than usual. I wasn't alarmed. What did catch my attention was the faint smell of cologne that trailed her into the room. At first, I brushed it off, maybe someone had hugged her goodbye. But then, when I leaned in for my goodnight kiss, I swear it wasn't just a hug. My stomach churned. Am I imagining things? I thought. Over the next week, my mind went to dark places. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, but something gnawed at me. The following Tuesday, when she left for wine night, I decided to check things out for myself. I drove to the cafe where the club supposedly met. The lights were off, completely deserted. My chest tightened, and for the first time in a while, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted. This was only the beginning. I couldn't have predicted how deep the rabbit hole would go. That night, I sat in the car outside the dark cafe, feeling like a complete idiot. Maybe they changed venues? Maybe she forgot to mention it, but the doubt wouldn't let go. Emma wasn't the forgetful type. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed the faint smell of cologne, the cafe's dark windows, and Emma's easy laughter as she walked out the door earlier that evening. The next morning, I casually asked her about book club. She rattled off the same details as always. The usual group discussing a thriller and, of course, a bottle of red to share. Nothing seemed out of place in her story. But I knew. I just knew. For the next couple of weeks, I started keeping track. Not like a full-blown detective, but close. I noted the exact time she left and when she came back. I jotted down her outfits, which seemed to get a little more date night and a little less book club with each passing week. And I started to casually pay more attention to her phone. She wasn't glued to it like some people, but I noticed how she'd quickly flip it face down when I walked by. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me. One Tuesday, instead of heading home after work, I followed her. At first, everything seemed normal. She drove toward the cafe, but then took an unexpected turn. My heart pounded in my chest as her car wound through quieter streets, farther and farther away from town. Eventually, she turned onto a dirt road leading to a secluded cabin. I parked a little way down the road and killed the engine. The cabin sat nestled among trees, its porch light glowing faintly. Emma got out of the car, looking around nervously before walking up to the door. And then a man answered. He wasn't just greeting her. He pulled her in for a kiss, the kind of kiss we hadn't shared in years. I sat frozen, a storm of emotions threatening to explode. The betrayal felt like a punch to the gut, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched as they disappeared inside together, leaving me alone with my rage. I stayed parked down the road for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. My hands gripped the steering wheel, so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to march up to that cabin, kick the door in, and demand answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I drove home in a haze, the image of their kiss seared into my mind. That night, Emma came home around her usual time. She smelled faintly of cologne again, and this time it hit me like a slap. She slid into bed beside me, humming some tune she'd probably heard on the drive back. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The next morning, I decided to confront her, well, sort of. I didn't want to reveal everything just yet. Over breakfast, I casually asked how her book club had gone. "Oh, it was great," she said, her smile bright and unshaken. "We're planning a big discussion for next week. A potluck. Where do you guys meet again?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Her hand faltered slightly as she reached for her coffee. Still the cafe downtown." "Why?" "No reason. Just curious," I said, forcing a smile. But I could tell she was on edge now, her mind working overtime. That whole week, I was a wreck. I couldn't focus at work, and I barely slept. By the time Tuesday rolled around again, I was ready to put my suspicions to rest or confirm them. This time, I followed her from a greater distance, making sure she wouldn't spot me. The route was the same, winding out to that secluded cabin. But this time, I stayed longer, long enough to see them through the window. They were sitting on the couch, heads close together, talking animatedly. Then the laughter came. It was the kind of laugh that used to belong to us, and I felt my stomach twist. Moments later, their closeness turned physical. I couldn't watch anymore. When she came home that night, I confronted her. "How was the book club?" I asked as she walked through the door. She didn't miss a beat. "Fine," she said, dropping her bag on the table. "Why?" I stared at her, searching for any crack in her facade. "Because I know you weren't there." Her expression shifted, just for a second, before she plastered on an indignant look. "What are you talking about?" I drove by the cafe. It was closed. She froze, her hand tightening on the strap of her bag. "Okay, fine," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I wasn't at the cafe, but I wasn't doing anything wrong." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice rising. "Then where the hell were you?" Emma hesitated for a moment too long before blurting, "I was helping a friend." "Helping a friend," I repeated, my words dripping with sarcasm. "At a cabin in the middle of nowhere?" Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic setting in. "It's not what you think. He's a writer. He needed help brainstorming plot lines." "Plot lines?" I laughed bitterly. "Do all your brainstorming sessions start with you making out on the porch?" Her face drained of color. "You followed me?" "Yes, I did." I snapped, and I saw everything. She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't find the words. The silence between us felt like a chasm, and for the first time in our marriage, I realized I might not know this woman at all. After that confrontation, Emma swore up and down that it was all a misunderstanding. "He's just a writer," she insisted, her voice shaking. "I was helping him brainstorm for his book. That's it." And the kiss. I shot back, my voice dripping with venom. "Was that part of the brainstorming?" She stammered, her face pale. "It wasn't what it looked like. He got emotional. He's going through a lot. I didn't mean for it to happen." I couldn't even look at her. "Do you think I'm stupid, Emma?" Her tears started then, the kind she always used to diffuse situations. But this time, they didn't move me. I told her I needed space and left the house, driving aimlessly for hours. I was furious, humiliated, and drowning in questions that wouldn't stop gnawing at me. Who was this guy? What else had she lied about? By the weekend, I decided I wasn't going to just take her word for it. If there was one thing I learned in all my years of marriage, it was that Emma wasn't good at covering her tracks. So I started digging. First, I searched online for any sign of this supposed writer. Nothing. No blogs, no books, no articles, not even a LinkedIn profile. It was as if he didn't exist. Then I remembered the cabin. If she wasn't going to tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. That Sunday, while Emma was out running errands, I drove back to the cabin. My heart pounded as I parked my car and approached the place. The door was locked, but a quick walk around the perimeter revealed a window left slightly ajar. I climbed inside, my adrenaline spiking with every step. The cabin was a mess, papers strewn everywhere, books piled on the floor, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the kitchen counter. But what caught my eye was a stack of papers on the table, bound together with a rubber band. A title was scrawled across the first page, The Double Life. My stomach churned as I started flipping through the pages. It wasn't just a book, it was a detailed manuscript, a story about a married woman leading a secret life. The main character's name was even similar to Emma's. As I read further, my blood ran cold. The plot mirrored our life. The woman sneaking away under the guise of a hobby, the secret rendezvous in a cabin, the lies told to her oblivious husband. But the twist at the end was what truly broke me. The writer, this man, I thought was her lover, wasn't a lover at all. He was someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My estranged brother, Chris. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room as I stared at the manuscript in my hands. Chris, my brother, the one person I hadn't thought about in years. The one person I never wanted to think about again. Memories of our falling out flooded back. We'd grown up close, but things had soured in our 20s. Chris was the golden boy of the family, charming, talented, the one everyone doted on. But he always had a knack for pushing boundaries, for crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. The final straw had been him flirting with Emma shortly after we got engaged. I cut ties with him after that, swearing I'd never let him into my life again. And now here he was, sneaking around with my wife. But why? What was his endgame? I wanted answers, but I didn't want to confront Emma yet. Not until I had the full story. So, I left the cabin and drove straight home, my mind spinning with a toxic mix of rage and confusion. When Emma got back, I acted normal, or at least as normal as I could manage. But inside, I was unraveling. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. Had this been going on the whole time? Had Emma sought him out, or had he come to her? And the worst question of all, why hadn't she told me? Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I waited until Emma was home, cornered her in the kitchen, and dropped the bombshell. Why didn't you tell me it was Chris? Her face went pale, the color draining so fast I thought she might faint. What are you talking about? She stammered, but her eyes gave her away. The writer, I spat. It's Chris, my brother. Why didn't you tell me? She hesitated, clearly scrambling for a way out. I didn't know how to bring it up. You hate him, James. I thought if I told you, you'd never give him a chance. A chance for what? To sneak around behind my back? To write some twisted version of our lives? No, she cried. It wasn't like that. I reached out to him. I thought maybe I could fix things between you two. I laughed bitterly. Fix things? By lying to me? By meeting him in secret? She started crying then, big, heaving sobs that normally would have softened me. But not this time. This time, I didn't care. You have no idea how much this hurts, I said, my voice trembling. You betrayed me, Emma. He said he wanted to reconnect, and I thought I could help. Help, I said, my voice rising. How does sneaking off to a cabin help? How does lying to my face help? Her sobs deepened, but I couldn't stop. The dam had broken. I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Emma. I don't know if I can forgive either of you. She tried to explain, but I wasn't ready to listen. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, leaving her in a heap of tears on the kitchen floor. I drove aimlessly, the storm inside me churning harder with every passing mile. Chris, of all the people, it had to be him. The brother I'd sworn off. The brother who had tried to insert himself into my life before, and now had found a way back through Emma. I ended up parked outside an old diner we used to frequent as kids. Chris and I would come here every Saturday after our soccer games. We'd sit at the counter, sharing a plate of fries and talking about everything and nothing. Those memories felt like a lifetime ago, like they belonged to someone else entirely. I sat there for hours, wrestling with whether or not to confront him. Part of me wanted to let it go, to pretend it wasn't happening. But the bigger part of me, the part that couldn't stand being in the dark, needed answers. The next day, I made my decision. I called Chris. When he answered, his voice was casual, almost smug. "James," he said, drawing my name out like it was a victory. "Been a long time." "Cut the crap, Chris. We need to talk. Now." All right, he said, clearly amused. "Come by the cabin." I hung up without another word and headed straight there. The drive felt endless, the trees blurring together as I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. When I finally arrived, Chris was waiting on the porch, leaning casually against the railing with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Well, this is a surprise," he said as I stepped out of the car. His grin was infuriating, the same one he used to flash when he knew he was getting under my skin. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, marching up the steps. "Why are you dragging Emma into this?" "Dragging her," he said, feigning innocence. "She came to me, James. She wanted to fix things between us. Said she was tired of the tension." "And the manuscript?" I snapped, waving the pages I brought with me. "This isn't about fixing anything. This is about you getting back at me." His grin faltered for a moment, but then he shrugged. "You always did think the world revolved around you." "Don't deflect," I growled. "Why would you write this? Why use her?" Chris exhaled a cloud of smoke, his expression hardening. "Because you deserve to know the truth." "Truth?" I laughed bitterly. "What truth? That you're still the same manipulative bastard you've always been." His jaw tightened. "The truth about what happened between us. About why I left. You left because you couldn't stand not being the center of attention." I shot back. "You left because you're a selfish asshole." "No, James," he said, his voice low. "I left because of you. Because you couldn't stand sharing the spotlight. Because you pushed me out." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. "Don't try to rewrite history," I said coldly. "You're the one who crossed the line." "And Emma?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Does she know what you're really like? Or did you leave that part out of the story?" My fists clenched at my sides, and for a moment, I wanted nothing more than to hit him. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, his laughter echoing behind me that I drove home with my head spinning, Chris's words rattling around in my mind like loose change. "Does she know what you're really like?" What the hell was he implying? I hated that he still had this power over me, the ability to plant seeds of doubt and let them grow into chaos. When I got home, Emma was waiting in the living room. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, but she didn't speak as I walked past her. I wasn't ready to deal with her yet. Instead, I locked myself in the bedroom, pulled out the manuscript, and started reading it again, this time more carefully. As I read, the pieces began to fall into place. The story wasn't just about Emma's supposed double life. It was about Chris, about our family, about the fractures that had formed long before Emma ever entered the picture. There were details in the manuscript that I hadn't thought about in years, things I'd buried deep, things I'd hoped would stay buried. Chris wasn't just writing to expose Emma or hurt me. He was trying to tell me something. But what? The answer came later that night. when Emma knocked softly on the bedroom door. "James," she said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk." I didn't want to, but I couldn't avoid it forever. I opened the door and gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the bed, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should have told you about Chris. I didn't know how. I thought if I could bring you two together, maybe things could get better." "Better?" I snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. I was trying to help. "Help," I said, laughing bitterly. "By sneaking around? By lying to me?" "I didn't mean to lie," she said quickly. I thought you'd be angry." "Damn right I'm angry," I shouted, standing up and pacing the room. "But now it's not just about Chris. It's about you. It's about us." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked utterly defeated. "There's something you don't know," she said quietly. "What now?" I asked, my voice sharp. "It's about Chris," she said, hesitating. "He told me something about why you two fell out." I froze. "What did he say?" "He said it wasn't just about me," she whispered. "He said it was about your parents, about what happened after your dad died." Her words hit me like a freight train. I hadn't thought about that time in years, but now it all came rushing back. The fights, the blame, the way Chris had accused me of taking everything from him, our father's attention, his approval, even the family business. "He thinks I stole his life," I muttered, more to myself than to Emma. "What?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "That's what this is all about," I said, the realization dawning on me. "He thinks I took everything from him, and now he's trying to take it back." Emma reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. "James," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. Neither had I. But now that I knew the truth, I realized the fight wasn't just with Chris. It was with myself, with the guilt I'd been carrying for years. Guilt I wasn't ready to face. For the next few days, the house felt like a minefield. Emma walked on eggshells around me, and I avoided her as much as I could. I didn't know how to process everything, the lies, the betrayal, and now, the bombshell Chris had dropped about our past. It was too much, but I couldn't let it fester any longer. If I was going to move forward, I needed closure. I called Chris again, but this time, my tone was different. We're talking face to face. No games, no bullshit. Just answers. He was surprisingly agreeable. "Fine," he said. "Meet me at the cabin." When I arrived, the mood was tense. Chris greeted me with his usual cocky smirk, but I could tell he was guarded. I wasted no time. "What's your endgame, Chris?" I demanded, standing in the doorway. "You've got my wife tangled up in your mess. You've dredged up the past. What do you want?" He sighed, putting out his "Excuse me?" I shot back. "You're the one who spent years blaming me for your failures." Chris stood up, his expression hardening. "Because you made me the scapegoat, James. You were always the golden child. Dad's favorite. Mom's too. And when Dad died, you got everything." "I didn't take anything from you," I snapped. "You were the one who pushed us all away." He laughed bitterly. "You really believe that, don't you? You think I left because of you?" "No, James. I left because I couldn't breathe in your shadow anymore. Every time I tried to do something for myself, you were there to outshine me." "That's not true," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. Chris walked over to the table, picking up the manuscript. "This," he said, holding it up, "was my way of telling you what you refused to hear. You're not perfect, James. You never were. And Emma, She's not perfect either. None of us are. Don't you dare drag her into this, I growled. She's already in it, he countered. She came to me, James. She wanted to fix this family. She believed you could forgive me. But the truth is, you can't forgive anyone not me, not her, not yourself. His words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. I had spent years carrying resentment, holding on to grudges, and avoiding the hard truths about myself. But that didn't excuse what he'd done. Why the lies, Chris? I asked, my voice quieter now. If you wanted to fix things, why didn't you just come to me? Because I knew you wouldn't listen, he said simply. You never did. For a long moment, we stood in silence. The weight of everything our past, our broken relationship, the mess with Emma hung heavy in the air. Finally, Chris spoke again. I'm not asking for forgiveness, James, he said. I just want you to see the truth. About me, about Emma, about yourself. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I turned and walked out the door, leaving Chris in the cabin behind. When I got home, Emma was waiting for me. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes filled with worry. Well, she asked hesitantly. I sat down across from her, feeling exhausted. Chris is Chris, I said finally. He hasn't changed, but maybe. Maybe neither have I. She reached for my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. What does that mean for us? She asked softly. I don't know, I admitted. But if we're going to fix this, it has to start with honesty. No more lies. No more secrets. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, James. I just wanted to help. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe her. Maybe it wasn't too late to rebuild, if not with Chris, then at least with Emma. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with scars and regrets. But it was a road I was willing to try and walk one step at a time.